What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the name Faust? Perhaps you're thinking of the famous tale by Wolfgang von Goethe about the man who sold his soul to the devil in exchange for knowledge, power, and earthly pleasure. But more likely, it's the drummer from the black metal band Emperor, founded in Norway in the early 1990s. Emperor were among the original pioneers of black metal and are widely regarded as a defining force in symphonic black metal. Faust was only 19 years old when Emperor released their foundational album In the Nightside Eclipse. But by the time it came out, both he and the band were already infamous for something completely unrelated to their music. But let's start from the beginning. The young Faust first discovered hard rock music as a young teenager in the 80s. It all started with Kiss, whose drummer Peter Criss inspired him to play the drums. But it wasn't until he heard Iron Maiden on the radio, played by legendary Norwegian radio host Tor Rune Haugen, that his passion for metal truly ignited. Living with his mother since his parents' divorce, in the year of 1990, he would attend a show in Jessheim, where the black metal band Mayhem gave a performance that would later reach legendary status. At the show, Faust also met Marius Wold, with whom he soon after would form his first band, Stigma Diabolicum. And, by the way, back then, before the internet, staying connected meant having pen pals and sending handwritten letters. Access to music was limited to what you could find at local record stores, hear on the radio, or order from mail order catalogs. For obscure genres like black metal, you relied heavily on small fanzines and tape trading networks. Cassettes were then copied and passed around the world, degrading exquisitely in quality with every generation. In later interviews, Faust would also express nostalgia for this period, when music felt rare and precious, when full-length concept albums and large record sleeves with amazing artwork was the norm, a sentiment I'm sure many can relate to. But I digress. Through this network, Faust came into contact with Samoth, and together they formed the band Emperor. Their influences included Bathory, Celtic Frost, Venom, and, of course, Mayhem. Not long after, he would also begin corresponding with Euronymous, who was the guitarist of Mayhem and also the owner of the notorious Oslo-based record store Helvete. In 1992, Faust would move to Oslo to work at Euronymous' shop. There he met Vari Vikenes, known at the time as the Count or Count Grishnak, and whose project Burzum was already signed to Euronymous' record label Death Like Silence Productions. So within a couple of years after attending his first black metal show, Faust was fully integrated into the so-called inner black circle of the Norwegian black metal community. That same summer, in August of 1992, Faust was back in Lillehammer to visit his mother. On one Friday night, he went out to have a beer at the pub. After midnight, he left the pub, walked through the Olympic Park, which existed because Lillehammer had been the host of the Winter Olympics. And soon he encountered Magne Andreasen, who was also visiting Lillehammer. Magne, a homosexual man, stopped Faust and asked if he had a light. While they were talking, Magne suddenly grabbed Faust by the balls, and Faust, having little sexual experience and none with men, froze in shock. When Magne asked if he knew a place where they could go, Faust suggested a spot further up. So they walked together into a forest. That's where Faust took out a folding knife, its blade about 10 centimeters in length. Suddenly, and overcome by intense anger, he thrust his knife into Magne's stomach 3 times. As Magne fell to his knees, Faust violently stabbed Magne a multitude of times all over his head and body. The forensic report would later conclude that a wound on the back had been inflicted with such force that the blade pierced the shoulder blade and penetrated the chest cavity with its entire length. In total, Faust stabbed Magne 37 times. As Magne lay bleeding to death, Faust began walking back towards the city. But upon hearing Magne moaning faintly behind him, he turned around and walked back. There he picked up a rock, intending to crush Magne's head. But he changed his mind as he feared that that would leave some kind of evidence. Instead, he kicked Magne, who lay gargling in his own blood, in the head until he went quiet and still. After that, he turned around and walked home. In later interviews, Faust has described his experience from the murder as if watching it unfold, not from his own point of view, but rather through the eyes of an invisible bystander, detached from his own actions. Upon waking the next day, Faust called Euronymous and told him what had happened. Soon after, Varg Vikernes called Faust, and they arranged to meet in Oslo at the store. By then, Euronymous and Vikernes were already planning to burn down the Holmenkollen Chapel, having recently constructed a bomb featuring a remote detonation mechanism. Upon hearing the plan, Faust decided to join them, and that same Sunday, on August the 23rd in 1992, they completed the final preparations, which consisted of buying gasoline and a battery for the bomb. Finally, in the middle of the night, they drove to the chapel, situated high up on a hill in Oslo. Euronymous and Vikernes went inside first, spread gasoline on the altar and set up the bomb, while Faust kept watch by the car. The bomb exploded, but failed to ignite the gasoline, so they returned. This time, Faust and Vikernes gathered hymnals and Bibles, stacked them against the walls, and set them ablaze. Once the fire took hold, they fled, and the chapel burned to the ground. Now, the body of Magne was discovered in the woods the day following the murder, but the police had absolutely no leads to follow in investigating the murder. In the meanwhile, Faust carried on with his life. Emperor went on their United Kingdom tour in 1993, together with fellow black metal band Cradle of Filth. While in England, after a gig in Liverpool, Faust actually confessed the whole murder to Cradle of Filth singer Danny Filth. But Danny Filth thought that Faust was full of shit, that he was trying to impress him somehow, and didn't believe the story to be true. But then something happened. Something that would have huge ramifications in the black metal scene and beyond. You see, on the 10th of August in 1993, Vikernes from Burzum killed Euronymous from Mayhem at Euronymous' apartment in Oslo. This had immediate and widespread consequences. The police had already had their eyes on the emergent satanic black metal movement in Norway due to a series of church burnings. But after the killing of Euronymous, the patience towards this youth environment was gone, and everybody who was involved or even associated with the scene somehow was brought into questioning by the Norwegian police. That, of course, included our Faust. And although not a suspect in any of the open investigations, what did he do? He spilled all the beans. He told the police everything, clearing his conscience. And he was subsequently arrested and formally detained in the middle of 1993. He was later charged at the Eidsvarting Court of Appeal in February of 1994. And if you are attentive, you might be wondering, why was he charged at the Court of Appeal, since typically you are charged at a district court, and then the judgment may be appealed to a Court of Appeal, and depending on the case, you might even be able to appeal that judgment to a Supreme Court. But in Norway at this time, severe criminal cases like murder had a Court of Appeal as the first level. So that is why Faust was charged at the Eidsvarting Court of Appeal. At the court, the prosecutor moved for Faust to be convicted of premeditated murder and church arson, along with some lesser crimes such as theft and desecration of graves. Faust pleaded guilty to both the murder and arson, but maintained that the murder was not premeditated and that he initially only intended to beat Magne up. The court, however, ruled that it was premeditated, despite the obvious heat of the moment nature of it. Through an argument that could be seen as something of a stretch, the court concluded that Faust must have had the intention to kill Magne as soon as he started hitting on him sexually, and that he had time to reflect on and plan the murder during the roughly 20-minute walk into the forest. When it came to the punishment, the court pointed to aggravating factors, most notably the brutal and violent manner in which the murder was committed. Based on the forensic report, it concluded that Magne, after being stabbed a multitude of times, had actually still been alive for some additional time, bleeding to death not until after Faust had already left the scene. Regarding the question of provocation, the fact that Magne had made unwanted sexual advances towards Faust, the court stated, even if Faust felt violated by Magne approaching him and reacted with shock, the act itself still carries elements of blind violence. Even after the initial approach, Faust planned and still carried out his deed in the way he did. He clearly had several alternatives to easily avoid the entire situation. The forensic psychiatric evaluation has concluded that he did not suffer any strong reduction in his mental capacities at the time of the deed. At the same time, the court recognized some mitigating circumstances. Faust was young at the time, had no prior experience of being approached in this way, and suffered from a depressive disposition which, together with his severe stutter, probably made him especially vulnerable. He had struggled with suicidal thoughts and had even attempted to take his own life at the age of 16. The court noted that it was likely that the black metal environment he had become part of had lowered his resistance to committing acts like the ones he did. However, the court concluded there was no real connection between the murder of Magne and his involvement in the black metal scene. By contrast, the arson of the Holmenkollen Chapel was clearly influenced by the extreme ideas he had encountered in that environment, but that could still not be considered a mitigating factor, according to the court. The court added that there could have been no doubt in Faust's mind about the seriousness of his crimes, and that for general preventive reasons it was necessary to respond firmly to crimes like these, which could be seen as expressions of values cultivated within exclusive youth subcultures like the black metal scene. In the end, the court found that the totality of the crimes warranted a prison sentence of 14 years, and so on the 25th of February in 1994, Faust was convicted, sent to prison, and the murder weapon was confiscated. By that point, he had already been in custody awaiting trial for 182 days. Shortly afterwards, Faust also testified on the prosecutor's side in the murder and arson trial against Vari Vikenes, which no doubt caused bad blood within the black metal scene. But now you may be wondering, what happened to the band Emperor and their music? Now, just 4 days before Faust's conviction, Emperor released the album In the Nightside Eclipse, an album that would become a cornerstone of black metal. Due to his imprisonment, Faust did not perform with the band at the time. In fact, he left Emperor after his conviction, though he later reunited with them for their 20th anniversary tour. In total, Faust would spend 9 years in prison before being released on parole in 2003. As for the aftermath, over the years, even though Faust has hinted at some degree of remorse, he has stated that a core value of his is to never regret anything, believing the world to be a jungle where survival matters most. And while interested in religion and philosophy, he maintains strong antipathy towards the Abrahamic religions Judaism, Christianity and Islam, and has expressed that Christianity, just like modern society, is rooted in pity and weakness. Reflecting on humanity, Faust has said that although we see ourselves as the crown of evolution, we are actively polluting our environment, destroying the planet, and slowly erasing ourselves from existence. But regarding his time in prison, he has maintained that he would never give it up, as it made him a different person and helped him understand himself and life in a deeper manner. He has described how it made him more confident and secure in every way. As for today, Faust lives in Norway with his wife and children, and he's still involved in music as the drummer of the black metal band Djävel. But despite being active in many successful bands throughout the years, he still holds a day job as a logistics manager. He has explained that he doesn't want to rely on music financially, believing that once music becomes your main income, you risk becoming a slave to commercial expectations, which ultimately influences the creative process negatively and kills the joy of creation. Music should be a way of life, a way to express yourself freely, not an obligation you fulfill to put food on the table. As for his most famous band, Emperor, he still insists that their best song is Inua Santana, which their singer Insan famously wrote the choir part for at just 17 years old, while diddling around in the studio of now legendary black metal producer Pytten. And speaking of his own taste in music, Faust has continually expressed his love for rock, thrash, death and black metal from the 70s, 80s and 90s, finding modern bands too streamlined and predictable. To him, music should provoke or at least engage, and that otherwise there's not really any point. Now, his current band Djävel is an extremely productive one, having released 7 full-length albums in less than 10 years. Their latest record, Natt till ände, was released last year, and Faust has joked that his biggest fear is that the band would become considered some kind of hipster black metal, and that if that ever happened, it would be a sure sign for him to call it quits for good.